Alright, so this is a quick supplementary video on just some learning strategies and some quick exercises that you can do to improve your design skills. So this one's a bit of an unscripted video, and I'm just going to go through a few things. But yeah, so one of the things that I think is really helpful to do is to just do red line overs. I'm pretty sure I have examples of this during my lectures, but basically I just go through, find people's designs or my own, and I go and try and spot where things are maybe, say, evenly distributed, or maybe look for some other design principle like echoing, whatever, you name it. But I think it's really important if you want to start developing your ability to see things like that. So for example, these two things are pretty even, probably a third strip there. This isn't even, but damn, it's close. So let's just call it that. Let's say it's even. If you mix these two things together, it's starting to look even. It's looking pretty sandwichy, you know? Looking pretty sandwichy here. Yeah, so I just keep looking. I would say that this detail ends probably kind of in the middle of this line. It's not egregious, and I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but just looking at plane changes right now, for example. So I'm not looking at, this is a front cap, whatever, this is whatever. I'm just looking at how big are these details, what's the size of these things, these changes, whether it's some sort of inset where the form is a plane change, when you see the shading change, whether it's a different chunk. You don't break it down just by physical objects and being like, oh, this is a screw, this is a bolt, this is a whatever. Just look at where things are changing. You can see all these cuts are pretty even. It's kind of even looking here, these form changes. Looking a little even. I'm not saying that you have to, that you can't ever have anything be even. Of course I'm not saying that. But it's very important that you be cognizant if you're doing it or not. So that way if you don't want to do it, that you don't. And no matter how much you fight evenness, I swear to you, you are going to make even things. It's just going to happen. But yeah, so this is one quick technique. Just go find someone's art, find your own art, find a picture, go study the world, look for this stuff. You see in my examples in the evenness videos or any other videos, I go and take real world examples. Try and visualize a lot of these principles. Also, another thing I want to bring up, and I'm about to talk about the next one, but when you're looking for evenness, keep in mind it's one thing to be able to spot it and another thing to be able to make it look better. Just because you can say, oh, it's even there, doesn't mean you actually know how to make it look good. So you have to, now that you've spotted the evenness, maybe go do a paint over, maybe do a line over. One quick tip is to do a levels adjustment and raise the blacks so that we have less. That way it's a little bit easier to see your lines if you're doing a quick paint over for someone. Alright, so another quick tip is just keep your geo super low. When you're blocking out and you're learning to draw, right? Especially when you're learning to draw. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is just because there's going to be a lot of 3D people in here watching this. So when you're learning to draw, you tend to need to block things out way more. You do line overs, you do, line unders, like pencil under, you do blocking out the perspective, all the forms, trying to make sure everything's accurate because you haven't developed the skills to just do it, So it's the same thing with blocking stuff out, but in 3D, because 3D is a very lengthy process, building a very solid foundation is way more important and way easier to work with than going right into detail. Try and get your plane changes, your forms, your major ideas, and everything represented with just primitives and shapes as much as possible. Also try to keep your geo very light. Using n-gons is totally acceptable, and if anybody emails me saying otherwise, I will have a pre-written paragraph of why you're wrong. The only reason why it can be wrong, just so I don't get any emails, is because 1, you're doing animation, so you need it to deform a certain way. 2, maybe you have some special, reason. But if we're just rendering stuff and we're just modeling, especially at this stage, does not matter. As long as your geo is planar and you're doing polymodeling, n-gons do not matter. For the most part. I always like to clean them up at the end. But anyways, keep your geo light, start working on the forms, and slowly work your way out in detail. I like to cut pieces out and then model them back together using the cut tool. I find that this allows me to have a lot of non-destructiveness to my workflows to a degree as far as design. But yeah, so then you see at the end we have a more clean end result, but it's very important that you keep it low. So another thing I want to talk about is if you get stuck in a design, maybe you're burnout, maybe you don't even want to work on it, do a draw over. Do something easy so you can make broad strokes without actually messing with geo. Try to just figure out what works for you. I remember when I started learning to design stuff, I couldn't just design in 3D right away very well. I had to do a lot of practice in 2D, and that's actually how I started learning to draw, was just doing paint overs, because it takes the process of designing in 3D and makes it a lot easier and quicker to get to an end result. So if that's how you need to start a design, whatever, just do what works for you. So if you need to do a paint over to get some ideas maybe going. If you're less of a visual person and you like to think, I kind of like to plan stuff out before I make it as much as possible, answer as many questions as I can about a design. So this is a technique that Mike Hill had, and he has a Gumroad that I'll put in the extended design resources PDF, but it's called a mind map. And basically you just take an object and you ask yourself questions like who, what, where, when, why, and how. And then you ask yourself questions based off of the questions you just asked. I liked this, but it wasn't something that I particularly have enjoyed using. I like to make lists personally, so if that works for you, feel free to do that. Here's an example. I made a list. I made a list for this project I was working on, so I just basically took a day, asked myself a bunch of questions, and started building it in my head based on the information I had. And then if I just forgot anything, I just read over it. But I found that this just helped me to pretty much speed up everything, or at least make the work a lot easier ahead of time, and that way I didn't have to put as much work into it while I was focusing on the actual making of things. So those are just a few techniques. Another one is work on your line work. Learn how to make cool shapes. It may seem complicated, but this is literally all just shape. It's mixing a box shape with this curved triangular shape with this more angular shape. Or sorry, I don't even know what this shape is. Maybe hexagonal. All this is just playing with shapes and just shape contrast and different things that I wanted to play with. So it's really no different than making just say a floor. And I'm gonna go back to these in a sec. But when I was learning to design, I started pretty much with just floors and flat things. So I only had to focus on shape, size, position, whatever, UVing, modeling. And so even in just 6 months progress, I felt that I was starting to see not only model and be better at design, but I felt that I was starting to find a way to quickly see these visual patterns and implement them. And I mean, both of these aren't that great, but you could see the difference in quality is pretty substantial, or at least it's a lot more interesting on the bottom one. But yeah, so the difference between the floor and the silhouette of this character isn't really anything. The only difference is I'm thinking about form. Form is pretty much just shape, but in 3D to a degree. But these are all just shapes. So this is why I actually never cover silhouette in here. And I think that working on floors or any type of 2D thing where you have to focus on shape is going to get you making interesting shapes very quickly. And then eventually you'll learn how to adapt it to form a lot better. But for me, I think that shapes are really important because then you can just start thinking about shapes, right? Like this is still shape. The outline of this is still shape. It's just in a different context. It's at a rotated angle, but I'm still thinking about shapes and how things are going to be looking, right? So there's not really much of a difference between doing some floor, doing maybe just some random shape drawings somewhere for no reason, and your object to a degree, right? Like I just think that doing any type of 2D thing where it's top down and more abstract, you have less elements to work with, right? You're not saying, oh, how can I balance form and function? You're just like, all right, well, I'm just going to make this look cool. You learn how to make it look cool in a vacuum, and then you can start mixing it with form. Anyways, that's just how I see it, and these are just a few quick tips that I think. Actually, one last thing. One quick tip too, if you want to practice floors, what I suggest is do this. Start with a plane. You know, a lot of people, when I give them this exercise, they go a little crazy, and that's probably not the most ideal thing. Create a floor plan and restrictions. So for example, let's say that this hallway branches out right here. Let's say that there's maybe, and let's assume this is for a video game, let's say there's a cover piece here. So basically what I've done now, and let's make it symmetrical. I think it's always easy if you just make it symmetrical, but you don't have to. So we can make it symmetrical, and we can start just making some changes on it, keeping it low. But when we have things like corners and we have like boxes that we have to move around, it makes us forced to try and figure out a different flow for our design. So for example, here I'm just going to start making some cuts, trying to find some shapes, straightening stuff out. And then what I do is I basically just start cutting around that line, and I'm not being super accurate right now. Also, I've made so many cut lines in my life, I can usually eyeball it pretty accurate. And then try keeping it this low detail for now. Let's go and add some more details. So let's add some sort of shape here. Something that's going to be echoing here and countering that angle. So you can see now if we start cutting out this shape, maybe we can vary up the line width here. I don't really like how that looks, but it's okay. We'll change it later. But it's really important that you just keep these holes. This is the exact same process that I pick, or that I do for my guns in a way, making these holes. And I'll show you how I clean it up in a second. So I'm not necessarily trying to make the coolest floor either. But try different floor plans, maybe try different restrictions to make it harder for yourself to figure out some kind of design. Because then you have to be thinking of how you're going to solve these issues. So anyways, oh, before I go, one last thing. This is how I close these gaps really quickly though. And the reason why I think this is important is once we just extrude stuff down, and you know, this is a design exercise, but once we extrude them down, we can just jam them into each other. And it just allows us to get the floor. And then if we, because we're creating this shape, we have an edge flow around it. So like if you're like, oh, I hate this line, you just delete it. And then you can go back, you know, stitch all of these together and redo your entire design. So you can see how powerful this workflow can be and why I prefer to do this when it comes to making floors and just practicing quickly, and making guns, and just how I poly model in general, because it just lets you make changes very quickly, figure out your shapes and your forms. But yeah, so hopefully this is helpful. Go try making your own floors, and you know, you're gonna find that after you do this stuff enough and you have enough restrictions like cover pieces, maybe like different types of shapes of rooms that you have to make the floors work for, you'll find that, okay, well, now let's translate this to a mech, right? Okay, when you translate it to a mech, let's say that we have some design here and we have to make the shapes work with it. This is just like a cover piece, right? Like you have to, or just something that's blocking the flow. You have to find a way to integrate them and make them work together. So it'll help you with shape, it'll help you with learning how to solve stuff. One last thing that I want to say, actually, now that I think about it, it also lets you see the relationship between parts. Because you're modeling things that connect, so like let's say we started making a wall. And I think making walls is a good next step. So like if we made a wall here, let's say that we really wanted to have a big form change and we wanted this to be interesting. But then it's going to make the floor a little bit different to work with. It'll give the floor a different shape, it'll give us some different design restrictions. So maybe we want some big angle change here and some form change, right? And so maybe we'll have to work with this shape somehow and work around it. Maybe you have some sort of window or ceiling, or maybe you want the floor to connect to the ceiling. It doesn't matter. Anyways, my suggestion, do this exercise. I think it'll make you a lot better at understanding not only shape and flow of things, but just how to solve these design issues quickly, right? Like if you only have 2 strips of a poly and you want to fix your evenness, it takes like 1 second. If you have a huge mech and you spent 10 hours modeling all these details and you're like, oh shit, it's even. Well, guess who just wasted a lot of time? So, be methodical, don't rush into things, and do some practice. Study the world, go do some line overs. If you're stuck, figure out how to get yourself unstuck, do breakdowns of other people's work, and just don't rush into stuff. Don't expect to just be instantly good at design. But yeah, so hopefully this lesson helps. These are some things that helped me. One last thing, because I keep forgetting things, and this is an unscripted lesson. Go teach people stuff. Go talk about stuff. Talk about design. Don't be afraid to sound like an idiot, because you're going to. You're going to be wrong. No matter what you say, in some way you're wrong, or another person's point of view you're wrong, or maybe you're just plain wrong. But that's good, because if you don't know that you're wrong, then how are you supposed to get better? If you don't know the limits of your ability to explain something, then you don't know the limits of your understanding. Just go talk to people. Find people who are excited about it. If you are, I'm excited about it. I love talking about design. So, yeah, just if you really want to learn it, like, embrace it. And don't be afraid to sound dumb or fail. Every time you fail in a design, that's good. And I said this in the other lesson, if you don't know that something's bad, how are you supposed to get better? The worst curse that you can have is to not be sure how it's bad. So, don't go easy on yourself. Don't go too hard on yourself. Be very honest with where your strengths and weaknesses are. Like, for example, I see this a lot, and this chapter is unscripted, so I'm gonna go into a little rant. And if you want to listen, you can listen. If not, you don't have to. I don't care. But I see this a lot where people will avoid trying to see what they're bad at, or they're ashamed of it, or like they feel bad about it. I mean, it's one thing to feel bad. Like, I feel bad about my weaknesses and I wish that they were better, but that's part of the process, right? But here's the thing. So let's say, for example, you're starting out, you don't know anything about design, and you're talking to some industry pro or whatever, and you try to act like you know what you're talking about instead of just showing where you don't know. They're not gonna, you're not tricking anyone at all. Just sound like an idiot, or be willing to sound like an idiot. Think about it like this. Maybe they'll think that you're dumb now, or maybe they'll think that you're bad or whatever. Who cares? It's about later, right? You want to grow and learn. Who cares where you're at now? It's about where you're going. So go there. Focus on how to get good. Don't worry about where you're at. I mean, that's one thing to say, of course, because I think as an artist, we all can feel bad about our art and whatever and get discouraged. And that's a totally different thing. Sometimes I went through phases where I didn't even want feedback because I just wanted to figure it out myself. And then I go through stages where I do want feedback. But it's important that you're honest with yourself. I could make a list right now for pretty much every project I've made of how all the ways that it could be better. And I realize them while I'm making it or after I've done it. And, what's wrong with being okay with where you are? I'm not saying that everyone is like this. I don't think many people are, but I do notice that there are a good amount of people who are like this, or they're afraid to show like that they're bad at something. Just be honest. Who cares? Because it's the truth. I never care about someone's skill level. I care about how bad they want to get better. And that's the only thing that should matter, I'm assuming a lot of people reading this tutorial are going to be starting out, or there's a good amount who are. So one thing to keep in mind when you're looking to get hired, right? Like, obviously you need to have your portfolio at a high standard, or high enough that you can get a junior job. Like, don't ever lie to yourself and think, oh yeah, dude, I'm really good. Okay, well, if you want to get a props job, for example, do you know how to bake? Do you know how to texture? Do you know how to do these things well to industry standard? Can you make a clean high poly quickly and then bake it down reliably and not have to rebake it 100 times and not know what the issues are? Like, be honest with yourself. Where are you? How well can you design? For example, and I'll be honest with how I feel about my skills, I feel like in some ways I am much more skilled than I am experienced. And I feel like in certain ways I'm completely lacking in experience to the point I don't even know what my skill level is in them. Like, the variety of things that I've designed. I would like to design more things, and I feel like I'm going to learn a lot more from that. So I feel like you just need to be honest and keep looking at what you're bad at. Like, where am I weak? I feel like my polymodeling skills could be better. And whenever I tell someone that, they just go, "Oh, it's like a rich person complaining about you know, not being able to buy a Lamborghini and they could only buy like a, like a Mercedes." I mean, maybe, I guess, to some people, but look at it like this. No matter where you are in your skill level, you can always be better. And I also think that it's important that you know that the people above you know that they can be better. There's no limit to how high of a skill level you can achieve. So don't really settle, I guess. I mean, some people have different priorities in life, I think it's important to have a balanced life. But yeah, anyways, my point is, when it comes to learning, here's some good techniques. Don't shortchange yourself. Don't lie to yourself. Be honest with where you're at and be fucking okay with it. Because it's about where you're going. It's not about where you're at. So, anyways, hopefully this video is helpful to some people. One thing I wanted to say in this tutorial series I didn't, and this is a supplementary video. I didn't even expect anyone to watch this, really. But yeah, so if this whole tutorial series gives you anything, you get anything out of it, you learn from it, you made a new design and you found that this helped you, feel free to share it with me. Email me. My information is everywhere. You can reach me, and I would love to hear about your thoughts, your opinions, how you feel, if it's helped you. So yeah, hopefully this was good. I'll see you guys in the next lesson.